So if you guys want to come up here, Elder, Chief. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Jamie Monastersky. I'm the Press Secretary for the National Chief's Office, the Assembly of First Nations. We're here today for the Conference Board of Canada report and the release of it today. Today we have Elder Alan Knockwood, who's going to start with an opening prayer, and then we're going to have National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanak with some remarks, and also Chief Lance Haymond will also make remarks, and then we can take questions after that. Elder?
I'm so nugama wala de randige. Oldasi otnani. Na samagnusa. Akchina makrebes. Also the meagrasi to naniga. Great Spirit, you gathered us together once again in safety and in health. We ask that our words be heard by those who could help, and how our words will help. Your way of dealing with us has been good, and we thank you. All my relations, thank you.
Anin Boujou, today I want to thank you. I'm coming to you live, of course, here from the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Territory. Chimigwech Chief for joining me, Chimigwech Elder for Knowledge Keeper for joining me here today. And we have just finished a study, and we can advance by investing in First Nations people. Canada can advance from last place of G7 countries to first place, and we could be a world leader around globally. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cindy Woodhouse-Nepanak. I'm the National Chief from the Assembly of First Nations. Again, I want to thank Elder and Veteran Alan Knockwood for opening us up in a good way this morning. I also want to thank you for your dedication to this beautiful country and to making it safe and secure for all of us. I want to thank the press for being here. I also want to thank Chief Lance Haymond for being with me today on this occasion, and for your many, many years of dedicated work on housing, on infrastructure, on water for First Nations. And I lift you up in a good way. Today we mark an important milestone in our shared journey towards equity, prosperity, and reconciliation, including economic reconciliation. The Assembly of First Nations is proud to release the Benefits of All Canadians report, which was commissioned by the Assembly of First Nations to the Conference Board of Canada to shed light on a critical issue, the benefits of closing the infrastructure gap facing First Nations communities. For decades, First Nations have faced systemic underfunding and neglect of basic infrastructure that other people in Canada take for granted. Safe housing, clean water, strong broadband connectivity, which means internet and access to cell service, reliable transportation, and more. This has led to deteriorating living conditions that hinder economic growth, limit access to essential services, and perpetuate inequality in our beautiful country. The Closing the Infrastructure Gap by 2030 report, which was released this past April by the Assembly of First Nations in collaboration with Indigenous Services Canada, revealed that closing the gap requires nearly a $350 billion investment by the year 2030. Today, we take this understanding one step further. Investing in First Nations infrastructure isn't just a moral and legal obligation, it's a transformative economic opportunity for all Canadians. And Canadians, we ask you to walk with us, to support us as we try to make this country more equitable for all people, including First Nations. The Benefits for All Canadians report tells us a powerful story of what happens when we make the investments needed to close this gap. Over the next 7 years, these investments would generate $635 billion in economic output and deliver $1.82 for every dollar invested. $309 billion added to Canada's GDP, strengthening our national economy. Nearly 2.4 million full-time jobs, providing stable employment for First Nations and non-First Nations workers alike. $87 billion in government revenues to federal, provincial, and local governments, funds that can be reinvested into communities right across our country. These are not abstract numbers. They represent real opportunities for families, businesses, and communities. The benefits extend beyond dollars and cents. Closing the infrastructure gap will improve housing, leading to better health outcomes and enabling more First Nations people to participate fully in the workforce. Broadband infrastructure will connect remote communities to the digital world, unlocking opportunities in online education, virtual healthcare, and digital entrepreneurship. Improved roads and transportation will link First Nations to markets, enhancing local economic growth and strengthening Canada's supply chains. The investment is also crucial for Canada's climate crisis goals. Many First Nations are already leading the way with renewable energy and sustainable development projects, which could expand significantly with the right infrastructure. The cost of inaction is staggering. If the federal government fails to act, the infrastructure gap will not close by 2030. Instead, it will stretch to 2040, with costs ballooning to $527 billion. This would mean 16 more years of First Nations communities living without the basic infrastructure other Canadians take for granted. 16 more years of lost opportunities for economic growth, reconciliation, and equity. We cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to wait, my friends. Delays will only increase costs due to inflation, construction escalation, and further deterioration of existing infrastructure. The longer we wait, the harder it becomes to address the crisis. Just in closing, today we are calling on the federal government to make the investment a priority in the 2024 Fall Economic Statement and the 2025 federal budget. The government has the resources. $370 billion has already been committed to the military industry alone. What's needed now is the will to act. We will be circulating this report to the federal government, opposition leaders, provincial government, the private sector, and community leaders across our beautiful country. This is about more than budgets and policies. It's about fulfilling Canada's commitment to First Nations people, recognizing our inherent rights, and building a future where every community thrives. Since its founding, Canada and the provinces have divided up the national resources of this land and the rights to do business. At no time were First Nations considered as partners in business. Instead, poverty and the restraint of trade were centerpieces of the Indian Act. So economic reconciliation has been a big part of our work during my first year as your national chief, not just as a moral and legal obligation for Canada, but because it's a strategic advantage for this country as a whole. Investing in First Nations infrastructure is not charity, it's a partnership. It's a chance to strengthen Canada as a whole, to reconcile past injustices, and to ensure that First Nations in Canada move forward together towards a future of shared prosperity. The Benefits for All Canadians report is more than data. It's a blueprint for change. Let us seize this opportunity to create lasting transformations. Together, we can close the infrastructure gap, deliver economic benefits for all, and build a stronger, more inclusive Canada. Jimmy Gwetch, thank you. I now would like to call up Chief Haymond.
So good afternoon, Chief Lance Haymond, Kebawek First Nation. I also co-chair the National Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure. Bozu, Kwe, Tanzi, Wachia, hello. Thank you, National Chief Woodhouse Nepnik, for your inspiring words and your leadership on this essential issue. I also wish to extend my gratitude to Elder Knockwood for opening this gathering and grounding us in the shared spirit of partnership and respect. It's an honor to be here on the traditional territory of my nation as we come together to mark the release of the Benefits for All Canadians report, a document that eliminates the transformative power of investing in First Nations infrastructure. When we speak about infrastructure, we are not just talking about bricks and mortar or roads and pipes. We are talking about the very foundation of opportunity, well-being, and dignity. For too long, First Nation communities have been left to struggle with inadequate infrastructure that affects every aspect of our daily life, from accessing clean drinking water to attending schools that are safe and well-equipped. The gap is not a First Nation issue, it's a Canadian issue, and it's time we treat it as such. The Benefits for All Canadian report makes it abundantly clear investing close to $350 billion infrastructure gap is not only an overdue act of justice, but it's also an economic game changer for the entire country. These figures in this report tell the story of shared prosperity. They show how investments in clean water systems, housing, schools, and broadband will ripple outwards, strengthening our local economies, creating jobs, and growing Canada's gross domestic product. This is not charity, it's smart economics. First Nations and non-Indigenous Canadians have a long history of working together. We've defended this land, shared its resources, and built industries side by side. The opportunity before us now is to extend this partnership into a new era of nation-to-nation collaboration. Closing the infrastructure gap will require expertise, labor, and materials from across Canada. Construction companies, engineers, and tradespeople, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, will work together to design, build, and maintain the infrastructure that will transform First Nation communities. But this also must be an opportunity for First Nation-owned businesses and skilled tradespeople to grow and thrive. With nearly 5% of Canada's construction workforce already Indigenous, we can and must play a leading role in building our own future. It's crucial to shift the way Canadians view investments in First Nation communities. These investments are not handouts. They are mutually beneficial investments in the shared future of this country. They are investments that will drive growth, innovation, and stability for generations to come, and more importantly, build the infrastructure that our communities so desperately need. This is why I joined the National Chief today in calling on the federal government to prioritize closing the infrastructure gap in its upcoming budgets. The $350 billion investment is not just a number, it's a lifeline to better futures for First Nation children, youth, and our families. It's a catalyst for growth that will benefit every Canadian from coast to coast. Let us recognize that this is a moment of tremendous opportunity. With the release of the Benefits for All Canadians, we have the data, the roadmap, and the partnerships in place. Now we simply need the political will to act. Together we can turn this vision into a reality. We can close the gap, uplift our communities, and build stronger, more inclusive Canada. One where every person has the chance to thrive. Miigwech, merci, bonjour. Thank you.
Jamie, do we take technical questions?
If there's any.
Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Elder. Thank you, National Chief. Do we have any questions that are posted online? We're done with our statements, yes. So I'm opening it up to the floor for questions from...
For journalists on Zoom, if you have a question, please use the raise hand function. Pour les journalistes en ligne, si vous avez une question, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée. Chris, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Carter from the National Post. You talk about a lot of investments and obviously the infrastructure gap, but another, I guess, important pillar of the government strategy for Indigenous part of their Indigenous strategy is giving business or contracts rather to Indigenous companies. And we've seen a lot of talk about that. And today we found out that the government suspended Global Health Imports, which was the company that Randy Boissonneau used to own, which claimed to be wholly Indigenous owned. Now we obviously know he does not claim Indigenous identity. So I'm curious to hear you on this, the government's Indigenous procurement programs. Do you support, for example, the suspension of GHI from these contracts? And is the government doing enough to ensure that the money that it wants to streamline towards Indigenous companies is in fact going towards Indigenous owned companies?
Look, thank you for that great question. I know that I'm going to be really candid here, I think, when it comes to what has been happening. So there's a lot of people that claim to be Indigenous that are not entitled to that, and to this small piece of the pie that First Nations do get. We do want to protect that for, I've said it time and time again, you need to be from a community, a First Nation community, and that community should claim you in order to be eligible for these programs. There's too many pretendians out there. I have to just be really open about that. And I know it's a tough discussion to talk about, but certainly it's something that hurts First Nations people. I know Chief and I have talked about that many times, as well as the Elder, on how harmful that is. And it's harmful to small First Nations businesses out there that are trying their best to work onto a contract, and they're pushed out by all these other, by people that shouldn't have been eligible to begin with. So absolutely, we need to make sure that we're maybe looking at like the University of Saskatchewan's model on Indigenous, who is Indigenous and who isn't, right? I think there's models out there that we can certainly use, but certainly coming to speak to the Assembly of First Nations, to our chiefs in Assembly about that very important issue, and looking through your guidelines, we'll be glad to help and to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So thank you.
Thank you. And as a quick follow-up, I was curious, in the events leading up to Mr. Boissonneau's resignation, I was curious if did AFN or maybe Grand Chief, did you have any discussions with either Mr. Boissonneau or the Prime Minister's office about if he should stay in cabinet, and also should he be allowed to run again?
Look, I'm gonna put that to my colleague who had commented on this, Regional Chief, former National Chief Joanna Bernard. I know that she had a statement on that. I'll leave that there. Of course, I am more focused on the work in Parliament, and it's frustrating when issues like, the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee, we're talking about something very important like water, and that's pushed aside to talk about an identity issue. So I mean, there's all that other work that's coming through, and certainly I just think that if the House of Commons wants to talk about identity, it shouldn't be a bunch of parliamentarians that are not First Nation talking about that. It needs to be First Nations people that are developing those membership codes, that are and talking about it in Parliament in order to fix it. Because let's face it, Canada had created the Indian Act on how to, and in all these other pieces that are not working. And First Nations need to be in the driver's seat to create, create our own membership. And that's never happened before in this country. It's always been Canada telling us who we are, who we aren't, including with, the Inuit, for instance. And so there's all these groups of, but First Nations need to be for sure in the House of Commons fixing this. And it can't be all parliamentarians telling First Nations what to do when it comes to our membership again. It just doesn't work. Come and talk to us. We'll give you the blueprint for how to get there. Our people know who our people are, and we certainly have to have a long overdue discussion on that. So I look forward to speaking with all Canadians about that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence.
Chimigoch. Thank you.
Short and sweet. You know that for a while, Jamie, or are you?